All right, Dakota, we're live just like that. Um, yeah, I'd love to kick off this conversation, get to know you a little bit. We were just talking a minute ago. We're both, you now live, and I used to live in LA. But you spent, I have a note here, you spent your younger years born and raised up in Anchorage, Alaska, which I had the pleasure of going to a few years ago, and I thought it was awesome.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was great. We went in the wintertime, and there was a decent amount of snow on the ground, and there was like ice carvings, and it was pretty cool. But did you, growing up there, did you realize that was kind of an unusual place to live, and you were kind of craving to get out of there, or is there anything that stuck out to you about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, it was one of those things where you don't really realize how unusual it was until you're not in the situation anymore. But like, I think the thing that was weirdest to get used to when I moved out of Alaska was like the long, summertime, like we're tilt, the Earth's on a tilt. So the days get longer and the more north you go, the more exaggerated it gets. So where we were living, it's pretty exaggerated. So the sun, like, June 21st, random bit of information, is the summer solstice. Not everyone knows that. In Alaska, everyone knows that. So it's the longest day of the year. And so in Alaska, the sun doesn't go down. Like the darkest it gets is probably like 8:30 right now for most places in the southern hemisphere. You know what I mean? So it's like, but your body has a circadian rhythm, based on energy, based on the light, right? So you would basically
Mm.
never get tired, and especially when you're like, in your early teens and 20s, like you could just go forever with just the light. So that, I mean, that was kind of interesting. I'd come when we moved down to California. It was like, why is it dark out? It's July. It should never be dark. And it's like, no,
Mm.
the rest of the world has daytime and nighttime. You don't in
Yeah,
Alaska. But
kind of
yeah,
kind of feels like a casino where I don't even know what time of day it is. I'm just hyped up.
exactly, exactly. That's exactly what it's like. Yeah, you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so equally, maybe not equally, but on the flip side of that, you have the winter solstice where it's just dark all the time up there.
Yeah.
Did that was that like did that cultivate a kind of culture where people are indoors, like
Yeah.
cracking jokes, drinking more, like
No, yeah, I don't know
that
about
kind of
cracking many jokes, but yeah, it's drinking for sure. Yeah, I don't know how many jokes are being cracked, but yeah, I mean that was why I actually ended up leaving. Like, people always like, "Oh, it's Alaska, it must be super cold," but like where we were, it's by the water, so it wasn't that cold. Minnesota gets colder, but it's just dark all the time, and so yeah, you
thing?
pay for it. You get that light in the summer, but you pay for it at night, and I mean in the wintertime, and it's just yeah, I can't deal with it. Some people are more and less sensitive to it, but I'm not into it. I'm not into
Yeah.
it.
And you moved down to get into stand up. Are you still doing any stand up today? Do you still have any interest in it nowadays? Do you go to any
I have
shows?
inter- I've gone to shows, but I don't get to get out much. No. It's been it was really helpful, I think, for like public speaking though, like getting into that and then transitioning to, well, I mean, really any kind of like presentation or even just like meetings, right? Like if I don't have to stand up in front of a crowd of people and make them laugh like every 30, 40 seconds, like any kind of like pitches that we've had to do or any kind of like, presentations, it's like, this is absolutely super easy compared to having to make people laugh,
Yeah.
consistently. So I think it's removed the nerves from that.
Do you ever drop in some jokes, like try to keep it fresh and keep the
Yeah, but I'm
skills
not as
sharp?
funny as I think I am. I don't think the skills are staying sharp. And I'll make like usually it's very like niche, like recruitment or like
Yeah.
startup humor, and it's just like crickets. And so it's like I'll get a chuckle out of it, and maybe like two or three people, maybe 70 laughs. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like the skills stay sharp. No.
Yeah, yeah. What do you find most interesting about the project you're working on now, Boone? Is it the growth potential? I mean, different people are different motivated by different things. Like, what stands out to you?
I think for me, it's the potential for the impact. Like I think having been a recruiter as well, like that's
Yeah.
what I was doing for a day job when I was doing for some of the stand up, and like it's just such an antiquated process. I mean, I don't think even people that aren't familiar with like hands on recruitment, I think we've all gone through like the hiring process, and I don't think anyone's ever been like, oh, this is super streamlined. This is really easy. So I think the opportunity for having a significant impact, that's what at least does it for me. I mean, yeah, there's the revenue and the growth and all that stuff, but I think like there's not a lot of opportunities, or it's not a common opportunity to be able to impact a large group of people by solving like a significant problem like that. And so I think the hiring process is something that every single person has to go through throughout their life, like whether it's finding jobs or finding talent. And so if you can improve that process in a significant way, that to me is really exciting. Like that's a really cool So like that to me feels like a unique opportunity. You don't get to have that potential to be able to have that kind of
Yeah.
impact.
What types of jobs do you think are most the lowest hanging fruit for innovation in recruiting? I would imagine that it looks quite a bit different whether you're hiring like a senior executive for some large corporation versus like a freelance journalist or developer for some project, or anywhere in the middle of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's actually a few different sectors, but I think like the what would be I don't really particularly like this term, but like the blue collar market, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think that's what's interesting is like you see a lot of innovation within the tech hiring, and it probably because the demand is so high and the pay is so good. But if you think about how much the tech makes up of the employment market, it's like less than 5%, right? So I think there's like a lot of like these overlooked hiring, whether it's like logistics, especially right now, like
Mm.
logistics, like construction, um, uh, hospitality, stuff like that in healthcare. I think there's a lot of those industries that are overlooked that have not only a lot of opportunity for improvement, but then by improving, you improve other, like that's to me is like how can you make the biggest impact, right? How can you improve people's lives the most? And I think like let's say for healthcare, if you can help improve that process, like not only are you helping those people and those companies get jobs, but you're also able to potentially better staff those markets and be able to improve those that are reliant on those markets. And to me that's, but yeah, I think those are some of
Yeah.
the most overlooked, is like kind of like I said, blue collar is a pretty generalized term and I'm not a huge fan of it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there for
Yeah.
sure.
Do you have any stats that come to mind when you think about, you mentioned the 5% of workers are tech workers. When you think about the number of people, not just the gross number of people, but the types of channels that people find companies through. I'm thinking you could be approached by a LinkedIn recruiter, it could be an in-person recruiter, it could be you just are skimming Craigslist or Indeed or Monster and you come across this company. Do you have a feeling as to like what the general flow is of people coming into
Well, there's a
companies?
ton of stats. I mean, like I think depending on what you're looking at the source, but you're like 60 to 70% better. You have a higher chance of getting the job if you come through a referral. So like
Hmm.
if you're like, so that's like a stat if you're trying to go in from that perspective. But in terms of hiring, this is one that I harp on a lot for our customers and anyone like looking at it. It's like the average candidate from a job board, it takes about maybe 5-10% of them will be hired, but through a referral it's anywhere from 70 to 80% get hired. And so for like a recruiter's perspective, that's like, think about how many fewer resumes that is, right? If you're able to hire 70% of the resumes that you get versus 5 or 10%, like that's a huge difference. So I think in terms of like improving like the hiring process, like the efficiency and allowing people to like spend more time actually like interfacing, I think that's a to me a pretty compelling stat. But I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I was curious because you were, doing this independently, working for a company doing recruiting, and then realized this is
Yeah,
antiquated. There's many different ways that it's antiquated, both on like how people find companies, how people communicate that they're even looking for jobs.
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Um,
Yeah.
did you feel like there was a particular entry point that made the most sense with Boon to say like this is where we can start and grow from there?
Yeah, I think there was actually like three, but the biggest one was like the process. Like I would look at like how people had to refer, and if you even talk to like some pretty like savvy companies, even Google and stuff, and I don't want to call anyone out in particular, but like you would see what their referral process was, and we've talked to some of these companies that I've seemed as very high tech to me, and we would ask them like how are people referring, and they would give you this like they could tell you could tell like two-thirds of them describe two-thirds of the way through them describing to you what the process is, they were like, this is not a great process to do this. And so as you're like, yeah, maybe we could improve that. So like the process itself, it shouldn't be like a DMV form, and it
Yeah,
shouldn't be
yeah,
like
yeah.
this, the kind of, nobody wants a treasure hunt when they're sending a referral, but that's how it is for a lot of companies. And I think the other process is like the communication of it. Like a lot of that's like, to me, it was one of the more surprising pieces, is like most companies don't let people know what happens with their referrals, which is a huge turnoff for the people that are referring, because it makes them feel like nobody cared about it, right? Like nobody even like took the time to let them know what happened with it. And so I find it an interesting bit of psychology that when we ask users like what their assumption was by that, that they assumed that nobody took like looked at it, like that some of them like that they assumed that it got thrown away. And I have to date never heard a company say like, when we ask them, what do you do with your referrals that you receive? I've never heard a company be like, oh, we just throw them away. Like, we don't even bother looking at them. But that's like the assumption from a lot of users is like, or a good amount, I wouldn't say that, a good amount of users is like, if they don't hear back, they assume that worst case scenario, which is that nobody, bothered to even look at it, which is interesting to me.
Do you think companies kind of hedge this, where some companies say, well, we have a great referral program, it's $1,000 or some percentage of their signing bonus or salary or something, and we would love to not pay that. So if we just, hire this person and then forget to inform the referral, then they might never ask, we might never have to pay. Do you think that runs through the calculus of some of the HR managers?
I think maybe some of like the HR manager, maybe, but I think most people are pretty savvy at this point with like the glass door and stuff like that. Like, you're better, the savings you might get from that, I think for most people they're going to realize aren't worth like the cost to that relationship with that talent, and like the cost of getting a lot of hires. Like, you don't, because not only could you burn that bridge from getting more referrals, but you could burn that relationship with that employee. They might not want to be at the company any longer, right? So I wouldn't say that it's never crossed anyone's mind that like, hey, maybe this not being so efficient could be to our favor. But I think anyone that's put any more thought than past that, or maybe that if they aren't so constricted on budget, they would think, all right, even by paying this, I could probably actually get 2 or 3 more referrals. You know what I mean? And that would save me so much more time and money that it would be totally worth it. Because if you look at the cost per hire, the cost for a referral, even if you're paying a pretty high bonus, is still going to be a lot cheaper. And that's actually what we find that's more interesting to me is like, companies are willing to like I hate keep calling Google out for this, but they had an article, so I'm not the one doing this, but
Yeah, yeah.
so but they were saying like they upped their referral bonuses from like $5,000 to like $7,000 to like $10,000, and they saw no change in the number of referrals, which you would think, oh, look, you're doubling that price. Like, you
Yeah.
would think, okay, maybe the amount won't double, but maybe we'll see, a quarter increase. To not increase at all, to me, is like really fascinating. And I think that goes back to like what you're like, what could you improve most? I think the process, improving the process, but also like the incentives. Like, this is something that we also spend a lot of time on, is like, when you incentivize people is really important, and more important probably than what you're incentivizing with. So if it takes me a long time between when I send my referral and get paid, that association in my head of like push button get treat is less there. So like, the sooner you can give people a reward, even if it's not money. That's the other thing, is a lot of companies like, well, we can't afford to be rewarding people. It's like, are you giving them recognition? Are you, is there a feed that somebody can get kudos in? Anything like that. Can they get points? Can they get even like a gift card or anything small like that? Can be like, recognition can be a really powerful motivator. But that to me is, I think, really interesting that like, we've helped companies go from spending $10,000 per bonus to like 2,500, and they've gotten 10 times more referrals, 8 times more referrals. And so it's like, it's not necessarily about how much you're spending or how much you're like, what that carrot, how big that carrot is. It's more of like, where is that carrot placed? How many, maybe, to abuse the analogy, but how many carrots are you placing along the way, kind of type of situation, that you can get a lot more. That combined with like an easier process, you can get a lot more results out of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Do you find that most companies are targeting, say, like a significant company, like over a couple hundred people and onwards and upwards? Do you find that they're targeting through their referral program professional recruiters, or at least part-time recruiters, or are they just marketing this to anybody who's in the industry and just trying to get, other employees or other people? I mean, they must have a 80-20 rule here somewhere, where the vast majority of referrals come in through some channel.
That's a really good question. So what's interesting is that like, a while when Boon first started, it was all employees. Like, they didn't want anything from, it was either like they thought of it strictly in the terms of either they're working with a professional recruiter or it's going to be an employee. And most of the time they preferred employees. And I still think there's a preference for employees, because they're going to know more about your organization than obviously anyone off the street. But I think this idea that like, well, just because they don't work at the company, if somebody's good at marketing, right? If a marketing person is referring me somebody else that works in marketing, they probably know what makes a good marketer. They may not know about my organization as well, right? But they're probably going to know a marketer better, maybe than even a recruiter would that does recruitment for
Mm-hmm.
marketing, because they're not them. So I think that's where we're seeing, like, I've seen a lot more companies open to the idea of like the difference between what we call, and I don't know what this is, like an industry term, but we call it like an internal referral would be like an employee referral, and then an external referral. And that's where you're like this, the mixture I would say is becoming more of like 70-30, 60-40 type of split, depending upon the industry, of like how much they're open to tapping into like people that aren't their own employees. But I think that's growing quite a bit, especially with how much, for certain industries, how high the demand is for talent and how difficult it
Mm.
is for them to find it.
Do you think that correlates, that growth in external referrals? Do you think that correlates with a growth in the total number of people professionally in recruiting? Like if you just were to add up that market as an industry, yeah, I mean, do you think it's shrinking or growing?
I think it's growing, but I think like the reason why I find your question really interesting, because it's something that I think is, if we can make, if people can make referrals more accessible, like think about it, you could do it as a side hustle, like what's
Yeah.
considered because that's what a recruiter does, right? Like think about what a recruiter, they're a professional referral provider, like that, they're
Mm-hmm.
referring talent, right? So if you can make that more accessible to people, you can, why wouldn't that market expand? Just like with Uber drivers, right? And Lyft drivers, like they're not, we can, they're essentially taxi drivers, right? But that market went from like, you had to have a certain number of medallions and it was a very finite industry, to your mom could be a taxi driver, you could be a taxi driver, your whole family could be quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
taxi drivers. But it was, the term kind of changed to like ride sharing, right? So I think that's kind of where I think there will always be like this upper echelon of like professional talent source, professional, recruiters. But I think the market of the average person being able to be a, what we would consider like a recruiter or a talent sourcer, there's, why wouldn't that expand? Why that, I don't see how that couldn't expand as technology makes it more accessible, because we're all sitting on these networks that we're not leveraging like
Yeah.
to their fullest
Yeah.
extent. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
LinkedIn's already shown, like, if you can benefit other people, that comes back on you like, two, threefold. Like, if even if you can just like give them, respond to their likes, respond to their comments, right? If you go and reach out to that person a few weeks later or whatever, the chance of them responding and actually being able to kick you some business, or do deals there, is much higher than if you just reach out to them cold. And I think that works for referrals as well.
Mm. It's interesting. It's almost like maybe the trend is that there's a more fragmented market. So maybe the total number of full-time professional recruiters might decrease, just like the full-time professional taxi drivers decreases, while the total number of people in recruiting, quote unquote, increases, as there's like fractional contributions through more efficient technology infrastructure, effectively, right? If you
That's 100%. Yeah,
mm,
that's a super articulate way of putting it. I think that's absolutely the way it would go. It would
mm.
follow very similar to what, like you're saying, ride sharing. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah, because it doesn't feel that dissimilar. I mean, the stakes are a lot higher when you're talking about full-time professional sourcing and like placements, because it just, this is my livelihood, this is what I'm doing. Think about it on the lightweight way, where it's like affiliates. Affiliate codes are the same thing conceptually as, even they call them referral codes. It's like the same thing, where you might put this
Mm-hmm.
on a link, like you could have it on a YouTube channel or Twitter or somewhere. You click on it, you click on the affiliate link, and you go to Amazon, you buy your deodorant, and then the person gets whatever the kickback is. That is the
Yeah.
most lightweight way to do it, because it's there's no actual work that the person needs to do. It's just like click on the link and then it's automatically tracked. That to me seems like the end state of this, what we're talking about, the recruitment referral industry, where it's
I
just
I think I think yes and no. So I think you're right. I think that is where it opens up, the funnel opens up. But it's really interesting that you're touching on these 2 points, because we spent all week in our company going over these 2 points, like the public and internal referral discussion, and then but also, so what you're talking about is what we differentiate as social and direct referrals. So what we call social referrals are someone basically grabbing a link to an opportunity and posting to their social media and sharing on a bulk. it's not bad, right? But what it would be, what I consider more of a marketing approach, right? So if I'm looking at the results that it would be expected from a referral has, you're going to hire them likely about twice as fast. They're going to have all these benefits. You're not going to see those benefits as much or as statistically as likely from that social referral, because it's not me thinking, okay, here, I want to refer this. I want to refer John Smith to this role specifically. That would be a direct referral. So I would expect the same kind of benefits from that. Me posting to my Facebook or LinkedIn saying, hey, anyone that's interested in this position or these positions at my company, apply. Again, not bad, but we we differentiate those two for our customers, because if I'm a recruiter internally, I would want to know the difference. Like if somebody's applying through a direct referral, if I have like, say 10 candidates that come into my pipeline, if I see that 4 of them came from a direct referral, I'm going to give those precedent and I'm going to give those priority over someone sharing socially, right? Because again, like they're not necessarily, like you're saying, they're not putting as much time and resources, which isn't bad. It's still probably better than just me posting randomly out in the ether for somebody to apply to. At least somebody that maybe have an authority and a network and an audience that is more catered to that type of position. It still has a higher likelihood of producing quality talent and more efficient that way. But yeah, I would want to know the difference between those two. So I see it going. I do see more facilitation of that kind of social referral. But I also think that there's just as much demand for like this direct referral. And I see it kind of like dividing further, where you have like, okay, maybe you have this upper echelon of people that do this full time. That is their main thing they do, and they do it really well. And then of this lower segment that we're talking about expanding, I see it kind of dividing, where you have kind of like these more of like influencers that maybe are pushing this more to a broader audience. And then maybe above that, or to a more niche crowd that still focus on sourcing, but maybe that's not their only thing they're doing, but they're pretty good at networking just naturally, of like connecting the dots and saying, oh, this company and this person, I think they're good for whatever reasons. Like I think we all know people that don't really seem to have to put a lot of effort, but are able to connect dots like that. And I think that will also be a big part of it. So I think it's two things there.
Yeah, the latter seems more interesting to me from upside potential. The former being awareness. It's like saying Olive Garden is a great place, go check it out, and I tell everyone I know all at once equally. There's no specificity to it, whereas opposed to like, hey, Dakota comes to me and says, I'm hungry, Mike, what place do you think I should go to? It's like now this, it's just like a hot lead, right? Go to Olive Garden, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna go to Olive Garden. I don't know why I would use Olive Garden. I don't even like Olive Garden.
No. It's funny to mention that, because in Alaska there was no Olive Garden, so it's like that was what everybody was all about. Like, Olive Garden was like the epitome of like restaurants you could go to, because we never had it.
It's like Sonic. Sonic is a restaurant. I've listened to so many Sonic commercials, but I've never even seen one in real life.
I think I've been to one time in my life, and it was like, oh, this has crushed ice. This is pretty cool. But I don't know what kind of, if that's like the big selling point of your restaurant is the crushed ice. I don't know. What
Go Sonic. Yeah, I think the former seems less interesting, because you're like, there's a few innovation spins I've seen. One of which is like somebody that has a big following will have a link to maybe their personal website, or just a direct link to like a jobs page that's basically a list of affiliate codes for them. And that might be based on their audience. Like if they're a big food blogger or crypto blogger or whatever, they'll have a list of companies that are sort of approved to be on their list. And they don't do anything to maintain that. It's just, it's kind of like a sophisticated way of taking that first approach of like pushing it out in social media. That's cool. At least that kind of segments the market into different categories. You could be, they could at least select the companies they want to be on there. They're not actively doing anything. They're not filtering the inbound people that come in. The latter seems more interesting, because there's like, it seems to me like there would be a lot of people who would make suggestions about which of their people in their network would be a good fit for different companies that they know, even if they're not working at that company. It seems like there's two sides to this. One is I have to know about the person that I'm referring, and then I have to know about the company. The company always seems easier to find out. The company will put it on a loudspeaker. We're hiring, and they have it on the social media and the website and everything. They'll have job description, salary, everything about it. There's not much mystery there. On the people side, sometimes, I don't know what the percentage is. I'm guessing 10% or lower of people who are actively, aggressively looking for work will put on, I'm looking for a job. It's almost like I've picked up that it's socially like a slight negative indication of disparity if you're like actively looking for a job. It's kind of like, well, why would you need to do this? The exceptions being people who are like highly liquid contractors where they're like doing jobs, always looking for doing jobs. So it's part of their work in that they constantly
Yeah.
flip work. But it's like if you're a software engineer, a marketer, somewhere in a professional large tech company, for instance, you're probably, the company's going to want you to stay there for years. So for you to be now looking for work means you're effectively homeless in the work world, in the career world. And it's not a good indication. It's like, it's not a good stat to have on your resume that you're out of work, period. I don't know if you have a reaction to
That's a
that.
really no. I think it's really interesting because so I this is all of the, it was really interesting. All these questions you're bringing up are like things that like we kick around all the time, and I think that you're right. Like this, there's this like it's not wrong that great talent looks less often. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
that fact has creates this negative connotation where, oh well, then, and whether people are consciously thinking it or not, but I think it's like, oh, this person's actively looking, they must not be good, which even good people will have to look at some point in
Mm-hmm.
time, likely. But I think how like one of the ways to get around that is to make it less loudspeakery and make it at least feel more like the person that when you're notifying that person that you've picked them because you think that they have. I think they get over the fact that you're looking if they feel that two things. One, if they feel that you're picking them out. So like we've worked on ways to like makes rather than me posting to my LinkedIn feed, hey, I'm looking, which I might not like as the job seeker for a few reasons. One, I don't like the negative connotation, but two, I might not want my employer to necessarily know that. Maybe I'm not happy at my role. Maybe I'm not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, jobless yet, but I am thinking about being that way. The other thing is that I think so making it easier for me to point out people in my network and find specific individuals that I think could help me. I think them feeling like I'm reaching out to them directly will make them more open to or more interested in helping me because that oh, this person thought of me. Okay, cool. I
Mm-hmm.
want to like follow through with that. But I also think if you can help facilitate, because I get this even because I used to be a recruiter, I still get friends that reach out and like want me to help them and say, hey, I'm looking for a position. And it's not that I don't want to help them. I do. And I want them, I like the fact that they reached out to me and they thought of me, but I don't have time in my day to drop what I'm doing necessarily to help them out. And so I think the other part of it is first part, just to clarify, is making it easier and more kind of low key for for people to be able to leverage their network and to be specific about who they're leveraging in their network. I think the other piece though is empowering the people they're reaching out to and making it lower hanging fruit. So like one thing we've been testing inside is like with Boon is being able to, if let's say you reach out to me like, hey, I'm looking low key, don't let anyone know, right? I get this, but if it can show me opportunities in my network, right? Companies that I know, people that I know that are hiring for roles that are good for you, if we can serve up even base level recommendations, the AI there doesn't need to be perfect, but if that can empower me to at least connect you with two or three opportunities, I don't feel like a schmuck or a jerk because I'm not helping you out, right? I feel like I'm following through on your request. But think about it, if you did that with, let's say, 5, 6 people, and even two or three of those hooked you up with two or three different opportunities, statistically, you're probably going to get one of those jobs. Again, because of the fact that they're referrals. Like you basically just made it, right? You've gotten your next opportunity at that point. You don't need a large volume of people following through with those referrals for you to probably land your next gig, if that
Mm.
makes any sense.
Mm.
So that to me is what's
Yeah.
really exciting about that is like, unlike when you're talking about job boards and all these things that require large volume, if you have a process because of how efficient like the network effect of like referring, like letting people that know other things be able to, how efficient that is, if you can tap into that and make it more accessible to people, you're going to see a pretty significant, the returns are going to be pretty significant because you don't need that large volume for it to be able to actually resonate and to be able to turn into something, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. 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 It kind of feels like the people who are really high in demand, the worker side, if they're very talented and very reputable and just the overall high quality individual, they're going to be faced with an overwhelming amount of abundance on job opportunities. And then there's the flip side where you're inexperienced, younger, may not have the best skill development. And so you're struggling to just get into the workforce. And both of those have problems. And the former scenario is like, hey, I don't know which to choose. What's the best project? It's not like help me get into a company. It's like help me decide how do I determine which company is actually well run and good founders and good team and a lot of upside. So that's what I care about, generally speaking, assuming everything else checks the boxes. That's what you would be thinking about if you're in that position. And just taking that on for a second, it would be you're relying on we'll call it a middleman, but it could be a piece of software or a network or an individual to say the reason you would go to this source is to help me filter. So then this source, network, or company or individual has to be able to have a wide net. They have to have access to a lot, and they have to have some mechanism for filtering those companies. Ideally, that's not public. So you have something more than just what's publicly available. Like, hey, I know this team, I know the upside, I know the industry, something about it that you're adding value. Because it's like, I find this industry really interesting because it's where the human brain and understanding personality and subjective elements of how we operate directly connects with salary expectations and equity and negotiation and the quantitative elements. It's like it's not driverless cars where it's just a matter of time for it's completely self-automated. It's like it really has to engage human beings and our meat suits in a way that is efficient.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, to me, that's what is so interesting about the recruitment space in general is that how the person and the technology connect is just as important as either side of those. Like, the term that I heard that I thought was pretty cool is augmented intelligence. You're using technology so technology is in charge of doing the heavy lifting, the ones and zeros, all the number crunching, right? But if you can effectively use technology to serve that up to people and let them do that fine tuning, right? I'm not going to be able to read through thousands of jobs and look through thousands of resumes, right? Like, I don't have the time, and even my cognitively would not be able to do that efficiently. But if I can have a system that can serve up 10 resumes, right? 10 people, I can do that all day, right? Like, that's so much easier. And so that's where I think if we can combine those two, and we're already doing that, but if we can do, the more efficiently we can do that is leverage technology. I think it's laughable, and I think you've called it out. Like, anyone in the recruitment industry where you hear AI does all of this, you kind of chuckle because there's no way it's going to be as good as they're claiming it can be, because there's so many nuances there. But I don't think it has to be. Why would we try to make technology be human and human technology? Why wouldn't we just let them be their strengths and let them be really good, a combo together, right? And that's where I think you're right, is doing that is really exciting to, at least me, for my opinion.
Why wouldn't a Tinder or Hinge type interface work in recruiting? Or maybe it does and I'm just not aware of it. But it seems similar, the problems of dating and recruiting, where it's like, okay, I got to find one that's a good fit for me and I'm going to invest in them. They have to fit all the boxes quantitatively, but there's a certain human element here that I need to assess, and that's got to be like an interview, and people go to coffee shops and dinners to interview each other. Is that is that interesting? Has that been tried?
So there's a few things. One, there's a company called Jobber that got bought by Monster that I was actually not involved with, but I was following them and had chatted with TJ, the CEO. That they had a flipping situation for the candidate themselves. Like, you could basically swipe left or right, and so I thought that was an interesting approach. But I think in terms of referrals, the difference there, that the best way I can describe it is that when you're flipping through Tinder, I've seen Tinder. I was married before Tinder came out. I think at this point, probably, thankfully, I don't know.
I met my wife on Hinge. So I was swiping all day.
There you go. Yeah, so I have friends that had tremendous success. I just don't know how well I would have done well. But the point is, when you're flipping through that, I think the difference we've pointed out while exploring that kind of interface for this is that when it comes to that, you're thinking for yourself, right? So that's an easier process when you're considering for you. But when I'm doing it for other people, I would have at least have to have a card or information for two different things. So I'm because when you're looking at the candidate, the person that you would be swiping for, you're just assessing it for you. But you'd have to have a card that presents to the company and the candidate together, and then likely highlight the key information that would be to help serve that up for them. So I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility, but I think the balance is how do you offer the right information to have the right amount of cognitive load. That's the first challenge. Is like, you don't want, like, the worst case scenario of that I could see is like the company's full company profile or something on LinkedIn, and then a full job, and then or the full job description and the candidate's LinkedIn resume. Like, that's not helpful to anyone, right? Nobody's gonna sit on that card and read both of those. So if the finding what information, like we talked about, the nuances, every role is a little bit different. So determining what information to serve up, I think can be done. I think would require a larger amount, a pretty large data set of user experience, and seeing like what information, and trying to figure out narrowing it down to what information per role tends to be the most like effective. So I think that would be the challenge. The other piece is that I think you want to make it easy, but you don't want to make it too easy. So like an example of this is like, we've gotten a lot of requests of people like, oh, I'd love to do bulk referrals, right? Like bulk direct referrals, where it'd be cool if it was just like an Excel spreadsheet where I could multi-select. Well, yeah, that would be nice for you, the referral provider, to do that. But I think a big question we get from a lot of our customers is, and I think the biggest concern is can you scalably increase, right? You want to scalably improve or increase the number of referrals. And by scalably, I mean not reducing the quality. Mm-hmm. So if you make that swiping, I don't know, right? But if you made that swiping, if that was too easy, then what would happen is you would really start leaning more towards that marketing side of things rather than the actual direct referral. So I think the balance there is finding an interface, and this is something that we spend, I would say, from the product perspective, like maybe half, if not maybe a little bit more of like the product effort is yes, the technology behind it, but the interface, like how do we present the information? Because just like we were talking about, like you can have this like really cool matching or really cool AI or any kind of like these like technology on the back end, but if you're not serving that information up to the user in a way that can be used effectively, the analogy I give to my team is like, we can have a super fast race car with a super awesome engine and everything, but if the steering wheel doesn't make sense to the user and they don't know where the gas or the clutch is, like we've effectively just made a giant paperweight, mm-hmm. right? Like unless the person can use it really well and it's intuitive for them, then all that technology kind of goes for naught. So that's kind of a very long-winded way of answering your question, but I think that's like the swiping feature is, bottom line is, I don't know if I think there's similarities there, but I think there's still some hurdles to apply something that simple to a hiring process, or at least when it comes to referrals.
Yeah. Well, there's both the level of algorithmic matching that the platform does. Like Tinder doesn't just throw you everybody. It takes your input and then it looks at the past matches you've had, and it runs probably a lot of data analysis on that and says this is probably in order too, just like the Instagram stories and every feed that you get socially. There's an algorithm that says the stuff on the top is the stuff you're going to be most interested in. It's not just linear or chronologically. And so there's work there that's being done. That's, if you think of this is a spectrum. On one side, it's complete noise, complete marketing. On the other side, it's like 100% match rate. This is the best person for you, guaranteed. So everyone lives in the middle somewhere. I think the algorithm of the platform adds a layer, like it adds some filtration. As a human being, you're interpreting the subjective elements of this person, subjective elements of this company, everything in between, and you're saying, okay, this person in this company would be good vibe check, and you say thumbs up, so you're adding a swipe. And then there's the the next step, which is similar in dating, it's like the cultivation of that relationship. It's you have to play the game, and I think they're not all that dissimilar in the game of recruiting and dating,
Yeah.
where you're like there's a communication engagement sequence that happens, and some candidates get super turned off by how companies engage with people. It'll be cold, or they'll just ignore them for a while. They'll get bad vibes, and then they'll disappear. So HR have real work to do there. And then there's actually the filtration in the interviews and that kind of thing. So I think, well, let me ask you this. What do you think about Web3, crypto, decentralization? Do you think there's a pathway to integrate some of the technologies there with some of the problems that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so this gets brought up a lot. Like, I don't know. I definitely think that there's potential. I am cautious to see specifically, like we've been. I think there's still a lot of more ground to be covered, like low hanging fruit for just like the process itself. I think, for example, like we've been looking at how can we incentivize and be using different kinds of like maybe like a token or something like that to be able to help positive reinforce users for certain behaviors and be able to help invest in like the currency behind that. But at least for where we're standing right now, there's so much more ground to be covered on whether it's the process, and even like we're talking about here, like I think this would be a step before having to go through like the decentralization. I think if you're looking at the order of priorities and the benefit, the return on investment to producing the end result, I don't know if that's going to be changing changing the end result in a significant. I mean, in a significant way where it would outweigh the priority of some of the other improvements, I guess. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, that sounds cool. That sounds interesting. Are there more serious issues that could be addressed more easily and more cost effectively with a greater return? Right now, I think definitely. I think the process itself is still so antiquated that's kind of like, you know, putting like an MP3 into an old Model T or something like that.
Yeah. That makes total sense. Well, that's a gift and a curse. The nice part about being in an industry so antiquated is there's like you swing a bat, hit something. Cool. Where are you? Are you where are you guys in the company building process? I see you have about 10, 11 employees, raised about $1 million. Does that sound right?
So now we've actually gotten to like I think we're about 2 million raised, and we have over 23 people now working at the company. So we've been able to grow. It was kind of a bummer. Like 2020 was actually pretty rough. I'll be honest. Like everyone basically, like, at least from our end, like a lot of the companies were like, we don't know if we're hiring, right? So everything kind of went ice cold for a minute there, which we had a lot of actually big things happening in the early 2020. So it's kind of a bump. It was it was a serious bummer going into 2020. At that point, was like, it seemed like everything went on ice. But then after that, things blew up because the job market just went crazy, right? Like we have, I think still like 10.2 million open jobs in the US or something like that. I don't know. So a ton of like demand to find talent. And so that has led to a huge uptick in demand, obviously, for like sourcing tools and trying to be more efficient there. And I think also that what's added to that is companies trying to streamline and systematize and like automate, you know, their operations. And so, in terms of growth right now, we've been really the biggest markets we've been seeing growth are in like healthcare and logistics. And by logistics, I mean kind of like e-commerce. Like we've been kind of grouping into that bucket, but really finding like those markets that we want to dominate and growing within those markets, and then using that to obviously expand further. But that's kind of where we're at right now, and growing as a team to be able to help facilitate that. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, totally. And do you guys structure it as a contract to the company? Like it'll be, hey, pay us some upfront fee, or is it just per referral, or some combination?
Yeah, so it's we charge for like the subscription for it, and then the product led growth that we found a lot more success with. So we went with, and I don't know, some other SaaS companies may have. I'd be curious to hear, you know, how that went for them. But we tried the enterprise model, and that was all right. But the growth is really slow there. You know, it might have bigger contracts, but the growth seems really like it's very incremental, and the sales cycle can be like 9-12 months depending upon the size of the contract and who you're selling to. when we started lowering the contract value and making it easier for just anyone at the company to start adopting this, or at least opening it up to more people in the recruitment team could do this without having to have a huge budget write off, we saw a significant uptick in like growth that way. So going with that like kind of like product led growth, making it more accessible, allowing people to see the value out of it quicker, that was a lot more effective. So we charge that subscription model like there, but we've lowered that a lot more. And then to help make up for that, we charge based on the success fee. So like we charge when you get a hire through Boon, that's when another fee is added there. But that way, like for a lot of our customers, they like the fact that, look, these guys aren't charging me an arm and a leg, and only time I really see, a notable fee is actually when I'm already getting something out of it, and I know it's well worth it.
Yeah.
So we've had success that way. But yeah, we've played with the different pricing models and just seen a lot more success with the lower upfront fee. I think people are looking for lower risk right now.
Yeah.
Especially.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, especially when they're used to already paying that fee to recruiters. How about the market? Last question for you. Do you feel like the last, say, 4 months or so have been a pretty significant downturn on the public markets? A lot of companies have laid off a lot. Healthcare seems like maybe they're just an anomaly in that they're not as consumer focused, so they lag the general market. Maybe the same for logistics.
I think so. We've seen like the budgets get restricted, but I mean I think people become more mindful of maybe the tools that they're using and the hires they're making, but there's still even across all the markets, the demand is still there. I think they're just being more mindful about maybe they're not hiring they're hiring 3 of these people, but there's still a significant demand for hires to be made across most of these industries. We haven't seen any like major shift in the number of job posts either. It's more about maybe the number of hires, and what's extended is the hiring process. So they might add a few more where they might have been previously, maybe 6 months ago, gone 1, 2, 3 rounds, and then they've hired. Right now, it seems like they're extending those hires and being a little bit more diligent about who they hire, because they want to either make sure that they stick, or they want to make sure that when they're spending this money, it's going to be they're going to be staying. I don't know, but that's kind of what we've been seeing. But truthfully, not a huge downturn in the amount of job posts that we've been seeing, at least on our platform.
Yeah, cool. Congrats on all the progress, man. Are you personally writing or tweeting anywhere out there? I'm sure we'll have links to the company in the show notes.
I've been trying to. I've actually had a lot of luck with LinkedIn lately. I like a lot of the engagement and posting stuff on there. I think it's actually gotten a lot better compared to. I think Twitter sometimes can be a little toxic, but yeah, I like LinkedIn.
Yeah, agreed. Cool, man. Well, congrats again on all the progress, and hope you guys keep crushing it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, Dakota.
See ya.